it is LGBT History Month, and I've got lots of questions for you around that. But I guess before we jump into the questions, just for people that may not know you already, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. So my name's Keiren Sharman. I am the head of portfolio management at Lloyds Bank Corporate Markets. But my relevance to this call is that I'm also the co-chair of the Rainbow LGBT network at Lloyds and the former co-chair of the Interbank LGBT network.
Great, amazing. So lots and lots of experience, and it's really great to see you kind of leading into all that. So, Kieran, I just want to start with like an opening question, really, which is probably a bit of an obvious one, but it is LGBTQ History Month, and I guess the question I have is, why is it still relevant today? Why should we be supporting, this special month for the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a great question. There's so many different reasons why we should be continuing to support LGBT History Month. I think the first of them is just around education and awareness. I think even amongst the LGBTQ plus community, we don't always know that much about our history and our alliances and the struggles that we face, but the achievements that we've made. And it kind of helps develop that cross-generational awareness, as well as kind of cross-community awareness of each other. And I really think that helps to foster a sense of community across all of us by showing the times where we stood by each other. So, reminding ourselves, there's a lot of transphobia in the world at the moment. That constant reminder in my head that the first person to throw a brick at the Stonewall riots was a trans woman. How the trans community have stood up for the LGBTQIA community before now, and now they need us in response. Thinking of when we faced the AIDS crisis and there were lots of gay men in hospital beds on their own, scared to death and facing this unknown illness, and there were lots of other members of the LGBT community, particularly the lesbian community, sitting by their sides, holding their hands, letting them know that someone was with them. These things really help to kind of bind us together as a community and really help to highlight the importance of having a community. And at times like this, where we're facing a backlash against our community, and certainly parts of our community, it's a really good time to remember that. It's a really good time to focus on that and actually find a sense of belonging with each other. And a lot of that history is missing from mainstream education. So this is one of the key times where you can really help to get that. But also on top of it, it highlights the resilience of our community and some of the contributions that members of our community have made. Thinking of some of the, major historical figures, like Alan Turing, you really kind of, it gives you a sense of pride as well. But also that it really helps to kind of educate everybody across the board, including allies, and helps to combat discrimination. We are facing into more discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community at the moment than we've seen for quite a long time. And it's one of those things where the more allies we can get on board with this, and the education pieces around that, the more we can help to really tell human stories and really help to engage people on our existence and the fact that we are here.
Great. So for you, I guess the importance of the LGBTQ plus History Month is bonding us together, that community that you talk about, which is really great, actually. But also, I guess, like you say, for some, the reminder of our history, and for people of our generation, we'll even remember things like Section 28. We'll remember growing up without the equality legislation that we have today, and all of that. So it's a community bond building exercise. It's also an awareness, and it's an opportunity to reach out to our straight allies, which I'm sure we'll come on to actually as we go through the conversation. So that's really great, actually. There's obviously lots of conversations around, the role of corporates in this space, and the role, of, I guess, of kind of, corporate activism. So I kind of want to get your thoughts, like, on that. Like, what do you see the role of corporates in this space to be? Because they have, I guess, historically been, in some ways, I don't know whether we'd call them activists, but they've been supported by supporting historically things like stonewalling, sign up to things like the diversity champions and all of that. So give me your sense of the role of corporates in this space today.
I think when we think about activism, you immediately kind of get a picture in your head of someone standing outside Parliament, holding placards. And that's not really the space where corporates can get involved in activism, because I think actually a lot of the time it would probably do the exact opposite of what you would want it to. I mean, think of kind of Jeremy Clarkson going to the protests around the farming community and inheritance tax. Actually, it kind of derailed a lot of their message. And I think when you start to add corporates into equations like that, it can sometimes come across as inauthentic. But there are great ways that corporates can actually really show their support for the LGBT community. Um, they can challenge governments on things that they see in society that discriminate against the LGBT community. As large tax-paying organisations and large employers in different countries, the corporates do have a sway, and they do have the ability to change direction, the direction of sort of politics sometimes. Now, that's not something most people see, but it does happen. But the things that you can see, the things that are visible, there are just the simple things. You can, setting up an LGBT network, showing your colleagues and your customers that you are a safe space, setting up corporate values and living by those values, so having the value of inclusion within your corporate values, and actually using that when you're choosing suppliers or who you're actually working with. All of these things really do make a difference.
Right.
But I do also think that, I mean, at the moment, that there's things as basic as having a D&I program. We're seeing such a massive pushback against that. 2 years ago, I wouldn't even thought of bringing that answer into this question, because I thought it was just a kind of such a basic standard that I almost wouldn't have even thought of it as activism. But actually, currently it is. There's lots of organizations standing up and saying, we stand by our D&I programs. We stand by the values of inclusion. Sorry, you were going to say something then.
Well, I'm curious then around, do you think that in the current climate, that whether we call it activism or something else, that corporates need to have a louder voice because of the backlash that you're articulating?
I'm not sure if it's a louder voice, but I think a continued stoic presence, absolutely. There has been a backlash against corporates in the LGBT space for a period of time. We've seen it at Pride marches, where you've had sort of anti-corporate demonstrations within Pride marches because they haven't believed in the authenticity of the corporate membership. This is the point to actually stand up and continue and push forward and be a part of those Pride marches, but be an actual proactive part of them, because you are demonstrating that people who have accused you previously of rainbow washing, that's exactly what you're fighting against now. You're saying that actually we didn't just support the LGBT community in the good times, we're supporting them throughout anything that's coming their way. We are a stoic supporter of the LGBT community. And there's other ways to have that visible representation as well. Continue to do it in your advertising and your media. Continue to do it by challenging any internal policies or processes or systems that you have that are discriminatory. Continue to change and make things better for the LGBT community, and put your money where your mouth is. Invest in those processes, invest in those systems to make sure that they actually really do work for everybody. Because that way it's showing the community that they have a value.
So you're articulating in some broad sense this idea of what's called alliance politics, where corporates can play a role and support a minoritized community, in this context, the LGBTQ plus community. And alliance politics, for those that aren't aware, was famously talked about by the philosopher Bell Hooks. And I'm curious to expand on that thinking, actually, around whether we need to have more of an alliance politics approach to inclusion at work, and whether that's between the LGBT community, whether it's with women, people of color, etc., etc. Because some corporate structures are set up with ERGs, etc., and in some ways, the structures themselves separate us out. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this idea of alliance politics and how it can be used in a practical way to drive forward our ambitions of inclusion and equitable outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one community that understands alliance politics, it's the LGBTQ plus community, because you're already talking about different groups of people who face different challenges within the same community. We are all on different journeys and we're in a different position in terms of our diversity journey. But the reality is we see the value of being together as a single community. And as I referenced before, we've seen that value in how we've managed to support each other over the years as well. And I think you can extend, well, there's a big focus across most organizations that I've seen where we really look at intersectionality and how we can be better allies to each other. But if you're in a marginalized group, you understand how it feels to be marginalized. The way you're suppressed or the way you're held down might differ, but that doesn't mean that you don't understand how it feels. And so there's a real value in being able to stand together and demonstrate what we have in common and stand by one another. You know,
so do you think?
Sorry, go on.
Well, I'm curious around. So, do you think that different minoritized groups have a responsibility to speak up and support others? So, for example, in the context of the murder of George Floyd, you know, where does the LGBT community lean into that, or where do women lean into that, and vice versa? Do you think that it's our responsibility to do so?
Yes, I do. I mean, I actually think it's the responsibility of everybody in society to look at themselves and look at everybody else and be more inclusive to one another, to learn more about each other, to be more curious and understand each other's journeys better. I mean, I think following the murder of George Floyd, I spent a lot of time actually looking into institutional racism and what it really meant, because I'll be honest and say I didn't really understand enough about it. But the Black Lives Matter movement was brilliant at educating people on what it was really like, what the real experiences were of the Black community when it came to working organizations, when it came to the police. You know, there was all sorts of aspects that were incredibly educational, incredibly informative, and it was really valuable to understand somebody else's journey. And I think
Great.
that's something we all need to do for each other. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter whether you're talking about social background, ethnicity, gender, disability, neurodiversity, all of those things. You know, there is a collaboration across all marginalized groups. And the more that we actually support each other, the better a community we are. And I think Jo Cox kind of said it best when she said, we have far more that unites us than that divides us.
Mm.
That saying is always in my head. So, you know, within the organization I work for, I am a member of every single network, ERG, because if I'm not there as a member, I'm there as an ally, because I understand the value of allies to my network, my community.
Mm.
And so I want to be that for other people as well.
Great. Well, let's explore that in a bit of detail then in terms of allyship, because that's effectively what you're articulating, you know, different groups supporting and being advocates and allies for each other. So what does the allyship mean to you?
I mean, to me, a really good ally is someone who wants to educate themselves. They're curious, they want to know more. They don't fear someone who is different. They just want to understand. They want to understand other people's human journeys, and they want to support them. They believe in a sense of justice for everybody. They believe in fairness for everybody, and they believe that you should be able to strive and work hard and get to whatever position, regardless of what group you're in, regardless of what community you're part of.
Mm.
But so, and in doing that, you have to be visible, you have to be vocal, you have to be there to help support in the good times and the bad. You know, you need to be there when, if you hear sort of recently, if you hear sort of some of the political narrative against the trans community saying there are only two genders, having conversations with your friends, your family, educating yourself on it first, but having those conversations to say, look, you know, how does this really impact you? Why are you so angry at a group of people that actually you don't know? you're kind of feeding into this media narrative of hatred, when in reality, actually, this is a population that you've barely seen, you've barely had any interaction with, and yet somehow you've sort of generated this hatred towards them. And
Mm.
it's kind of the role of allies to stand next to every community and be that voice, because we all know about affinity bias as well. You're much more likely to listen to someone who is heterosexual talking about the LGBT community than you are, and listen to them and really hear them, than you are actually a member of the LGBT community themselves.
Yeah, because of how that, yeah, like you say, the biases work and things like that.
Yeah, you
So,
listen to someone who looks and sounds like you.
mm,
That's actually the person much as it sounds terrible, that's the person whose views you're much more likely to align to. So you're much more open to listening to them because you don't think there's a sense of bias in what they're saying.
mm. So we've got the notion of allyship as so individuals can, to your point, be curious and stand up and speak up and be the voice of and all of that and support and use their power to challenge hate and discrimination. And then final question then, if we bring it back to organizations in the context of LGBTQ plus History Month, in terms of if you say, well, right, what can we do? Like in your experience, if there was three things or three tips that, to make a very, very practical difference that you said, actually, if you do these three things, it will have a positive impact. What would those three things be?
Um, I think the first one is show up. Show up for marginalized communities. Be there. Be an actual physical presence. Be part of the journey that they're trying to undertake right now. There's a massive pushback at inclusion as a whole. Stand up for marginalized groups and show them that there was real authenticity behind the value of inclusion for you, your organization. You know, it's the time to kind of show the grit of D and I at this point.
Mhm.
You know, it's almost been a sort of nice to have until now, whereas I think now it's really essential to show that you are really authentically behind marginalized communities. I'd say number two is to really build on your actions, really build on visibility. Make sure that you showing yourself and your organization to be a safe space. It will have multiple positive impacts in terms of it shows marginalized communities that you're a safe space, so you attract talent, you attract customers.
Mhm.
It really does kind of, not only is there a good business case behind it, but you actually can show that you're living the values of your organization. And I think one of the other key things is to make sure you have visible LGBT role models across your organization, particularly in leadership positions. And those people need to make sure, and you need to make sure those people have a voice, make sure they're heard, make sure they're part of the conversation going forwards, because it will help to, you can eradicate fear through education. You can eradicate fear by continuing to show human stories and successful role models. That's a really important way of sharing joy and success in a community, because you don't want marginalized groups to feel like victims. You want them to feel engaged, to feel that they can strive and we can all achieve the same things. All you're really trying to do with inclusion, with D&I as a whole, the intention is just to remove barriers so that we can all achieve the same level of success related to your talent and your merit. So they're the things that we need to be able to demonstrate.
Great, amazing. Keiren, we could talk all afternoon, I'm sure. Thank you so much for your time. I know how super busy you are, so I really appreciate it. My name is Dan Robertson. I am the MD of Fairer Consulting. At Fairer, we are on a global mission to create opportunities and spaces which are free from bias and discrimination and have organizational cultures which actively move towards promoting equitable outcomes. Find out more about Fairer. We will absolutely be continuing to do a whole series of things throughout LGBT History Month, just as we do with other celebratory months. So come and talk to us, find out what we're doing, look at our website for our free events. At Fairer, we like to give stuff away for free. knowledge is often free and stuff like that. But again, Keiren, thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll see you on a future episode. Thank you all.
Thanks for having me.